I'm not positive that that qualifies as a country song. And the reason being, like the first time I heard it, I thought, like John Travolta could dance to this song. It's got like a 70s groove. Is that right? I mean, it's just me. Just me. Okay, thanks. It's like it's a cross between, in my mind, it's a cross between uh, Beach Boys and disco. And I don't know if that qualifies as country, but it is Zac Brown Band, so we're going to put it there. And let me put a little qualifier here about this whole series. I should have said this last week. I'm going to say it now. If you didn't notice, country music has a lot of references, a lot of sexual references, just if you haven't noticed. Also, has a lot of alcohol references, surprisingly so, like, if you haven't noticed. And we're not going to address those every single week, but I promise you, like, we're going to spend 1 week on each of those, all right, and kind of draw some perspective on it. So, this song, like, I just, I like it. All right, any song that talks about love is good, and it has this message. I mean, like when Jesus was asked to kind of sum up, like all the confusing rules of religion, all the Old Testament, do this, don't do this. When he's asked to sum all that up, what he comes up with is simply like love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbors yourself. I mean, he just kind of breaks through all the haze and all the not so sure what I should do here, what I should do there, how does this apply to every situation? Breaks through all that and just says, hey, like move towards people with love. And then we talk a lot about that. And we talk about who we're supposed to love, how we're supposed to love them. I mean, that's just the message. And we talk about loving God a lot. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength. Then we talk about loving your spouse and how do we do that well. We talk about loving our kids, or trying to, all right? And then loving our parents and respecting them. And then we talk about loving our neighbor because Jesus talks a lot about that. And then we talk about how we should actually go to the nth degree here and love our enemies. And there's where the bar just keeps going higher. And you think about all these groups, and like, wow, like it's almost exhausting to think sometimes about how much we should love and what we should do. But rarely do we kind of flip the page, and rarely do we say, okay, I know I should love, and love should be going this way, but actually ask the question that the song like kind of demands. It's not like go and be love, love somebody else. We talk about love, but how easy are you to love? I mean, just think about it for a second. Let's just do a little rating, okay? And you can yell it out if you want to. But let's just go like 1 to 10 scale here. Like you're just rating yourself, okay? You're not rating somebody else, all right? Particularly not right now. On a scale of 1 to 10, like how easy are you to love, all right? And a 1 is pretty much, I am impossible to love. I am really, really, really difficult to love. I mean, there's people who should love me because they have to love me, but that's pretty much it. And that's where I'm at, okay? With a 10 being, like people don't really even have to try to love me. It just comes natural because of my essence. And when I flow into the room, love oozes out of people towards me. It's weird. Just explain that. So 1 to 10, rate yourself, all right, in your own mind. We want to yell that out together just so it's not too intimidating individually. Let's do that, all right? On 3, I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, and then you yell out your number, okay? Now, you can rate yourself at 3, but that's not the 1, 2, 3, okay? 1 to 10. You ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay. All those middle ranges is really dominant, right? Because we don't want to go too far out there, but we don't want to be too hard on ourselves either. Just think about it for a second. I mean, how hard are we as people to love? I'll be honest with you. Just in general, like you're at church, so you're a person who goes to church. Generally, that category of people. Like if you were rating, if you had to put one number, 1 to 10, on the broad category of church people, like what number would you give church people? Are they easy to love or hard to love? Like, just go ahead and shout out a number for church people. And remember, you're in that category. So, yeah, 4. Anybody? 5, 3, 6. 6 is the highest. Anybody, did I hear 7? Who else? Like, I'm thinking that 6 is probably generous for the church, you know, broad, worldwide. Like, we're not known as like, wow, those people are just so easy to love. So I think it's a great question. I mean, the song brings it up. It's obviously in a marriage context or a relationship context, and you're thinking, wow, like whoever that girl is that he's singing about, I he is in love with her, and it doesn't take a lot of effort. Okay, let me just give you guys who are dating, all right, advice. This is free, okay? And I'm pointing at you high schoolers, okay? But that's just because I'm pushing right there. But anybody that's dating, if you are hard to love right now, or if the person you're dating is hard to love right now, you just need to go ahead and end that, okay? Because you don't get easier to love. You just don't. And everybody's laughing, not because they're laughing at you, because their experience tells them it's completely true. Like, it's just the way it is. Like I look at some couples and you're like, they're dating and well, this is like this. I'm like, man, if you're having these problems now, like you just need to just take a break, all right? Because you don't generally just magically become an easier to love person. But it's a really good evaluation that I think that we all should do, and that's my goal this morning, is that you walk out of here kind of evaluating yourself about how easy am I to love, and whatever number you gave yourself. First of all, because I told you to yell it out, go ahead and tick it down 1 or 2 notches, and that's just because you don't want to be honest out in public, and I understand that. So take whatever number, and your real number is probably 1 or 2 below that. Okay, all right, unless you have no shame at all, and then you're probably on the lower end anyway. And so, and start saying, like, what does it take for me to move from like a 3 to a 6 or 3 to a 7 or 4 to a 6? Like, if I could just become an easier to love person, what difference would that make in my life? What difference would that make in the people around me? Am I easy to love? And how do I become easier? Well, let's just think about it for a second. You talk about these different categories of people that the Bible asks us to love. All right? Love God. And kind of here's the list. You love your spouse and you love your family, whether it's your kids or your parents. And then you go on from there and you go to neighbors. And then you go on to there and you go to enemies, because that's kind of the progressive list there of how the Bible talks about loving different things. And you think about this list and you think about how when you move, if you'll kind of put that whole list up there on the screen, if you when you move from one from God to spouse, and then you keep going down that path. Here's the thing: these these become progressively harder to love. Okay, just hold on to that. The other thing about this list is one of the reasons they're progressively more difficult to love is because there is less love returning to you in each of these. All right, I mean, whether you realize it or not, like God's love for you is infinite, completely infinite. And it is unconditional. So it doesn't really matter about your behavior. It basically doesn't matter how easy you are to love. In fact, this is a great way to understand the gospel. What you have to understand about the gospel, in fact, what you really need to get to, the place you need to get to in your heart and life in order to enter into a relationship with God, is you have to realize then when you're evaluating in your relationship with God and you're saying, God, how easy am I to love? You have to understand that you register a 0 on that scale. You understand that? Like you are a complete mess. You are a complete bankrupt person, unworthy of God's love. But that's how infinite and complete his love is. I hear this statement every time. I've heard it for years and years and years. Every single time I hear it, I think, is that really true? Is that really true? Because I can't believe it's true. And then I go and I say, well, yeah, it is true. You know, have you heard the statement? There's nothing you could do to make God love you anymore. And because that's true, there's nothing you could do to make God love you any less. And when I hear that, I'm like, oh, there's something in my heart, and there's something in my humanity, there's something in my being that says, no, I want to be worth it. There's something in me that's worthy. And the reality is the gospel is dependent on the idea that there is nothing that we bring to the table on that. That we are in a complete bankrupt situation with God. And God, in his grace, that's what grace is. It's unmerited favor. So grace isn't, hey, you register a 3 with God, and grace fills in the gap from the 7-point difference there. And now God's love is perfect. Because I'm glad you brought that 3 to the table, because God's only going to come 7. Or grace just fills in. Let me tell you, that's the danger of pseudo-Christianity, of pseudo-spiritual. That's the danger of being in church a lot, is you start to believe that this whole relationship thing with God is somehow dependent on your being lovable and you're being good enough. And we get that, unfortunately, because a lot of the love that we exchange with each other is conditional. And so there's very, very few pictures of unconditional love moving out into the world. But that's what God wants us to do. It gets progressively more difficult in these relationships to love. One, because God's love is moving towards us in a complete, unconditional fashion. That's the message of the gospel. Is that while you were still sinners, while we were all still sinners, while we were still enemies of God, that's the way the Bible teaches us. While we were going our own way, direct opposition to God, his love moved towards us in a complete fashion. And his sacrificial love that sent Jesus to the cross pursued us. Now, another way to think about it is this. Sometimes people ask me a lot, like, David, what's the difference between the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament? Because the God of the Old Testament seems like wrath and judgment. You get worldwide flood, wipe everybody out, let's start over. Desire to do that again. And then there's these groups of people that are just radically disobedient to God, and he wipes them out. But then you don't have those stories so much, to that degree in the New Testament. And what's the difference there? And I was like, well, the difference is the difference between the Old and New Testament. I mean, Jesus Christ is sitting right in between that. The Old Testament prophet Isaiah says that God poured out his wrath. He's pouring out his anger against all sin on Jesus. And what that does for God is it frees him to love. He has taken everything that's unlovable about all of us and placed that on Jesus. And in essence, because of Jesus, only because of Jesus, we become easy to love people from God's perspective. All of us, not just us church people, but everyone. That's why God's love can move freely to everyone because of Jesus. So there's less love returning to us, like God's love is pursuing us completely. When we get into a spouse relationship, there's just less love than God has. Okay, that's our goal for our spouse, right? Is to love, or for us to love our spouse. but there's less love coming back to it. It's an imperfect love. And then when you move to your kids, you're just hoping you get a little bit of love, maybe once a month, in return for all that you pour in. And I know you kids don't believe that, but it's true. And then with your neighbors, like some neighbors are kind of easy to love, yeah? I mean, the house that I bought 6 or 7 years ago now, it was in foreclosure, so it was empty for like 2 years or something. And my neighbor, because it was empty for so long, and we're on a cul-de-sac, so the front yard's just kind of just one small front yard together, in a little pie shape. But the backyards are like big, and he just started mowing the yard while the house was empty, for 2 years, I guess just because he wanted it mowed. Well, he just has kept on doing that, and I've kept on letting him. I mean, he's an easy to love neighbor. I mean, and sometimes I'm like, Kurt, man, like I pull up from a ball game or doing something fun, and he's out mowing the yard, and I'm like, maybe I should turn around and sneak back in when he's not out there serving. It's like, wow, man, like you're easy to love because like just do that. And then sometimes I'm like, no, I need to mow the yard. I'll take care of it today. He's like, really, David? Like, I got this. I'm like, it's just in my pattern. He doesn't even make a big deal about it. He's like, it's just kind of, it's easier to mow both yards. It's not easier to mow both yards. Come on, Kurt. And then sometimes I'm like, my kids are so irresponsible. They need to go out and mow the yard. Kids, go out and mow the yard. And they'll go out and Mr. Kurt said he's got it, Dad. And I'm like, tell Mr. Kurt that he's making me raise irresponsible kids. I mean, that's just, but and there's a few things that I don't like about our neighbor, okay? But they're like, who cares? He mows my yard. And so that's he's easy to love. But there's a lot of neighbors that aren't easy to love, yeah? I mean, it's harder. And then you get to this ultimate idea of how do we love our enemies? And that's a hard one, okay? But honestly, loving our enemies is actually the core of the gospel. Why? Because when we love our enemies, we are reflecting and imitating exactly what God did to us, his enemy. See, until you see yourself in that role, you'll never see your responsibility in that role. And when we take on that nature, that's what we do. We imitate God. And so the question kind of becomes like, how easy are you to love as a neighbor? How easy do you make it for your enemies to love you? That's a good question. You should wrestle with that. Well, here's some people that are not easy to love, okay? So I'm just going to put a few categories. I could have probably put 10 or 12, excuse me, down there, but here's three, okay? These are people that are not easy to love. If you're always offended, okay? Like if you're always offended about everything, like you are not an easy to love person. Just tick that number down. Those are the things that push your number down under 5. And I don't know, I think it's just the social media age, or maybe it's just the political year, but everybody is perpetually offended, and now you have a platform to like throw that out there to everybody. And I'm like, when you're always offended, you're hard to love. Second group of people that's just kind of hard to love is the people who are always right. Almost left this one out of the list because I kind of fit in this category a little too much. And here's one of the things. Like, first of all, that's a bad personality trait. Just having to always be right. And I just blame it on being the youngest child. And so when you grow up always wrong, then you just think, okay, sometime in this whole life, I deserve to be right. And so now I have to always be right or whatever. I don't know. It's probably a really lame excuse, but it's if you always have to be right, you're just not easy to love. And here's the thing about this, particularly when it comes to Christianity and church, um, the reality is the scriptures are true, and like we are right when we embrace that truth, okay? But just because we're right doesn't mean we have to be harder to love in being right. And I think that's a real fine, distinction for how we're supposed to love other people and how easy do we make it for people who would never go to church to actually try church. I mean, have you thought about that there might be 15 people in this community that don't come here because you're here? I mean, like that's a good evaluation. Look, don't feel bad. There's hundreds of people in this community that don't come here because I'm here. So just kind of join the party. But let's not just say, hey, let's deal with it. I am what I am. No. Like we listen. Like, hey, like how can I be easier to love? Even though I'm right as far as the truth of Jesus Christ and God's love for all of us. Like and the reality of sin and what that does and the separation and all that. Even though I'm right, not because I'm right and youngest child, but I'm right because that's what the scriptures teaches. But I don't have to be obtuse in that rightness. I don't have to be terrible. And like, do we make that message easy? The other person that's hard to love is a person who's always independent. Because let's just be honest, you don't want to need anybody's love. Um, and and you come about that in a couple different ways. One of the paths there is a hard path because you've been disappointed and you've been let down um, because people haven't loved well, and that has just built up to the place where you're just like, you know what? I don't need anybody's love. I don't need your love. I don't need your love. I'm just independent. I'm okay. And it's hard for people to figure out how to love an independent person because you've created your own reality and you're good. I'm good. Everybody's good. We're good. Don't need anybody. So those are the things that, being offended all the time, being right all the time, or being independent, those are the things that tend to tick that number down. Now, what kind of pushes that number up? All right, let's think about that for a second. One, always having a forgiving spirit. I mean, when you have a forgiving spirit, like you're easier to love because there's always going to come moments when somebody offends you or sins against you or does something that really harms the relationship. And in that moment, are you going to be easier to love or harder to love? And easier to love meaning we're going to have a forgiving spirit. We're going to adopt that attitude. And we're going to be prepared for it because we know it's coming. People are going to disappoint us. What it does for everybody else around you is it says, you know what? I have a forgiving spirit. Therefore, you don't have to worry about being perfect. You don't have to worry about loving me perfectly like God loves me because I know that's an impossible standard. And I'm going to forgive you when you fail. The second thing that kind of ticks your number up is just having a generous spirit. I mean, generous people are easy to love people, right? I mean, people like being around generous people. And if you're not generous, you tend not to attract people around you. What does it look like for you to imitate a generous God? And just be saying, like what I have is given to me by God, and like if somebody needs this or needs to borrow that or whatever, like it's okay. What does it look like? What does it look like to have a serving spirit? I mean, again, like my neighbor just makes himself real easy to love because he serves us relentlessly. I mean, we're on a 7-year run here, all right, of just barely mowing the yard. God's making up for all the times I had to mow the yard when I was young. He's like, here, gift. But you know what? If you want to be easy to love, just serve somebody and take on that mentality. And then the other thing is a humble spirit. Humble people, they're easier to be around. So you think about those things like a forgiving spirit, a generous spirit, a serving spirit, a humble spirit. Well, that's great, David. This is my caution for you. Please don't go out of here and hear the load of great. Now I gotta be easier to love. So I go figure out how to forgive more, how to be more generous, and you feel the weight of that little stack up. It's the most dangerous place about or part about being in church and listening to a message is the tendency in our flesh and in our mind is to take that message and load it on to a to-do list and walk out of here with a greater to-do list. And that's what the enemy wants you to think. It's just what the enemy wants you to think. Because you walk out of here more weighted down and you're thinking, wait a minute, I thought church was, the gospel is about freedom. I don't feel more free. I feel more enslaved. Listen, the whole message of the Bible is like, here's the standard. The standard is so high. And the reason that God details the standard out there isn't that you and I would seek to meet that standard. That's not even, Paul says, that's not even the purpose of the law. That's not even why the law was written. The law was written so that you will know the standard and know how far you fall short. If there was no standard out there, we wouldn't know how far we fall short. We wouldn't wake up to the reality that we can't climb our way back up. And we would never get to the idea of, wow, God has provided for this shortfall. That's who Jesus is. That's his sacrifice. If we didn't know how high the standard was, we would not know how grateful to be as people who have been thought about and pursued by a God who sacrificed his son so that he could express unconditional love to us. So the standard is up here, and it's not for us to say, hey, here's the standard, be more forgiving, be more generous, be more humble, try harder. That's religion. The gospel says not try, but we trust in a God who sent his son to die for us. And so our gratitude is wrapped up in a belief and a trust in Jesus who died for us. When we put our trust in him, then what he adds to us is his spirit that is like a God engine inside us, transforming us from within, not outward behavior. Like, I almost feel like sometimes the most dangerous thing to do is act in a way that you don't feel inside. Because it creates this dissonance and this hypocrisy, and it hides the fact. Like, we just need to be who we are, but we need to be transformed from within by God's Spirit working in us, so that he generates the love that we lack. He generates the generosity that we lack. And so that what does come out isn't our nature, it's our transformed nature as God works in our hearts to recreate us in his image. So if you should feel the responsibility, don't walk out of here feeling the responsibility to do more. Feel the responsibility to drink deeper of God's well of resources. And that's what's going to make you easier to love. So if you don't get anything else, this is what I need you to get. Being easy to love requires drawing from a well deeper than your own. Because if you go out of here and try to be more humble and more generous and more serving, without a deeper well to draw from of God's Spirit and his resources, you're going to wear yourself out. And it's not going to work out very well. You might last a day, a week, a month. You might even hit 3-month mark of just being a better person. But sooner or later, that's going to wear out. You got to have a deeper well. And you got to tap into resources from God's Spirit. The second thing is that you got to trust the promise beyond this life. Like we all have this little scale when it comes to love. And honestly, the scale's not bad. I think God put the scale in our hearts, okay, in our minds. We're kind of like, okay, I've loved them a little bit too much, and it's getting out of balance, and I'm not so sure it's worth it now because here's my love and here's their love, all right? And we kind of tend to be in these relationships, and we have that scale. But here's a perspective. We'll close with Jesus' words. And think about these two things. Being easy to love requires drawing from a deeper well and trusting a promise beyond this life. So Jesus says, but to you who are willing to listen, I say this. I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who hurt you. Like, whew, it's a high bar. He goes on, he says, give to anyone who asks. And when things are taken away from you, don't try to get them back. Like, this is being an easy to love person, yeah? Do to others as you would like them to do to you. The great golden rule, right? That's impossible without drawing from a deeper well. You don't just say, I'm always going to choose to do unto others as I would have them do to me. You don't always make that decision. You make it more consistently when you're drawing from God's resources and you're trusting Him to fill you with what you need so that that's how you can be to those around you. And Jesus goes on, though. He says, if you love only those who love you, why should you get any credit for that? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good only to those who do good to you, like, why should you get any credit? Even sinners do that much. Everybody does it. The world's economy is built on loving those who love us. Like, I give you a favor, you give me a favor. Like, that's how it is. That's no Christianity. That's no, honor or nobility. And if you lend money only to those who can repay you, why should you get credit for that? Even a sinner will lend to sinners for a full return. I mean, that's just like being a good bank. Who cares? But love your enemies. Do good to them. Lend to them without expecting to be repaid. And this is why. Then your reward from heaven will be very great. And you will truly be acting as children of the Most High. For He is kind to those who are unthankful and wicked. You see, we've got to believe a promise that's beyond this life. God's just saying, hey, at the end of this life, if you feel like this, where you have poured all your love and you have tried to be easy to love to everybody around you, including your enemies, and you feel like this, just know, there's a reward for that. Don't feel like, hey, I got to get to the end of my life with this level out. I want to receive as much as I give. I want to get back as much as I pour out. If you feel like that's your standard, it's not a bad standard. I think God's put that scale there. He just wants you to extend the life of that to beyond this life. Does that make sense? Because He's going to balance that out. In fact, when God steps on His scale, okay, it goes like this. And that's His promise. Your reward from heaven will be very great. And on top of that, because you're trusting a future reward, okay, you'll truly be able to act like God acts. God promises this future reward from heaven so that we can be free to love without feeling like we've got to be loved in return. We can be easy to love people because we're trusting that God's going to more than fill in the gap. And besides, we get to imitate Him because He's kind to the wicked. So you must be compassionate just as your Father is compassionate. That's what it means to be easy to love. Just imitate God. Go out of here today and let's figure out how to be easy to love people. But don't walk out with weight. Walk out with the freedom of a God who loves you deeply, who's provided for all of your failures. All he asks is for you to receive that and to trust him. And he's filled you. If you've trusted him, he's filled you with his Spirit so that you can be an easy-to-love person. So drink deeper from his well and have a greater trust in his promises. And let that be what we leave here with. Not a to-do list, just an opportunity and an invitation to drink deeper, trust greater. Let's pray. God, center our hearts on the good news of the gospel. Center our hearts on the goodness of your love for us. Center our hearts, Lord, on Jesus Christ. Help us, as much as this world wants to push us into a give and take relationship, and I'm going to pour out as long as I get back, like, as much as this world operates on that scale and that economy, God, move us away from that. Remind us over and over that we can love freely, that we can love like you love. God, we're reminded today of a mass tragedy in our nation with over 50 people, I think, killed this morning. We're reminded of how hard and evil this world can be. And let it spur us on to love unconditionally. With a relentless trust and belief that there's a life beyond this life. And that there's rewards that aren't in this world. Fix our minds on that so that we can be free to be your children, your agents of love in this world. And we pray in Jesus' name.